Hello and good day to everyone attending today's webcast. 5 Business Transformations Demanded by Rapid Digital Adoption, sponsored by Innodata and Publishers Weekly. This is Melissa Powell. I'm the producer for Publishers Weekly, and I will be your host today. The world is becoming more mobile. Smartphones and tablets are becoming the tools of choice for many consumers, with statistics showing incredible growth in ownership for the months and years ahead. This poses multiple challenges for publishers and content managers. Today we'll hear about the challenges that this rapid digital adoption poses for publishers and the 5 business transformations that must take place to face those challenges. But before we go on, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. For the best webcast experience, turn off pop-up blockers in your browser, as these may cause problems when viewing the webcast. If you are experiencing technical problems, please use the help button on the audience console, and the webcast tech team will get to you as soon as possible. Attendees can use the enlarge screen button to make the viewing area larger. If your screen becomes locked due to local network congestion, try using F5 to refresh the webcast console, and if you're on a Mac, that would be Apple R. You may download the slide presentation at any time by clicking on the Download Slides icon at the bottom of your console. We're planning for 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webcast to address your questions on the air, so don't hold back. Send those in via Ask the Question chat box, and if we don't get to your question today, we'll get back to you via email in the next few days. This webcast will be archived and available for on-demand viewing in approximately 1 week. You'll get an email notification when the archive is available. You may also tweet about this event with the handle #PWDigital and email friends about it using the email icon at the bottom of your console. Now let me introduce you to our presenter and panelists. We have with us Jim Lewis, Senior Vice President at Innodata, Renee Swank, Vice President of Consulting Practice at Innodata, and Stephen Casbear, Vice President of Consulting at Innodata. As you can see, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's get started. Jim, please tell us about the challenges we are facing as publishers in the digital age.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Lewis, and we're going to talk about the rapid digital adoption. I was actually thinking about when I knew everything had changed in this marketplace. Innodata's been in the ebook space really since Kindle started 4+ years ago, and more recently with the introduction of the iPad, we're approaching more than 2 million titles that we've put on there. And so I was thinking about 2 vignettes. One, I was watching a commercial where it was a scene on an airplane where the flight attendant was handing out laptops, and the manufacturer of the laptop doing the advertising had invented a laptop that was very light and portable. And so instead of handing out these big clunky things, the flight attendant was handing out the smaller lightweight laptops. And I watched that and I said, there's something funny about that commercial, but I can't put my finger on it. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on an international flight. It was night when the flight took off, and everybody shut down. The lights in the cabin went off. And, of course, climbing through 10,000 feet, everybody could turn their devices back on. And there was a weird glow in the cabin, and I looked around, and almost every person in the cabin had an iPad. It was one of those moments where, as I said, everything changed. Go to the next slide here. So what, according to Gartner, just to give some math to this, they're expecting, Gartner's predictions about what Apple will, how many iPads will be out there by the end of this year is over 100 million. If you listen to Apple's earnings from yesterday, you might think that that's a small number, and I wouldn't doubt it. Some other estimates talk about more than 300 million tablets. What really is taking place, though, I think, and it's in 2010 the iPad came out. Last year, everybody was studying, looking at it, trying to figure out how to deploy either apps or ebooks into the iPad and now tablets. it's what I would call a disruptive technology. The market has really changed, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and my colleagues Stephen and Renee will help me out on that in a couple of minutes. What I mean by disruptive technology is really a new market, new pricing models. The consumer behavior is changing. And so for all of us that have been in the publishing business for years or perhaps decades, this is very challenging. First thing that we see, and we're talking to our customers every day, and one of the first thing that comes to mind is that for them, the revenue model. What is the new revenue model? Certainly in the ebook space, different price points there, but it's not limited to that. I think the way we have viewed content and our publishing cycles over the last decades has led to a fair amount of predictability, but our customers are changing, and we have to change as well. I think the last point I wanted to make before we get into a bit more detail is that the content that is being produced is wrapped in software. In other words, if we look back even a few years ago, a lot of the work that we were doing with publishers meant that we were converting, transforming, helping them to publish that content electronically. But today, it's all wrapped in software, and a lot of publishers are not software technology companies. And that is a major challenge in the digital adoption sphere. Okay. I want to talk about several key future trends. First of all, some recent studies, LexisNexis reported that while 100% of users are using search engines, that content is not as accessible as they'd like it to be. And what we see is what I would call the Google effect. Google has been tremendously accessible and successful at aggregating lots of content. But if you do a search for your name and get 3.7 million hits, that's not really useful. And so we see a very ever-increasing trend for companies in the publishing space trying to add fidelity, add character, add dimension to their content so that it's findable and searchable, almost a narrowing down of the search parameters rather than expansion of that. And I think that's going to be an ever-increasing trend. So, for example, if you are if you're publishing content and a customer comes along and looks at the content you've provided, the notion of them asking the question, well, what else is available from this publisher? What can I get if I'm studying a book or looking at a book on traveling to Paris? What else can I get about that trip? What other information can I link to? What else can be served up to me? And I'd really like to get it from that particular publisher. So that's a notion that we think is going to increase in popularity. Certainly the platform wars, it's not only hardware. Now, I mentioned earlier about the Kindle and the iPad. You could look at the Galaxy, the Samsung Galaxy and others. What we're now starting to see, particularly in the app world on the iPad, and we think that will come in other forms, is people building platforms on top of the platform. So, for example, Inkling would be a good example if you've not heard of them. They provide content particularly targeted at higher education. It's a very rich multimedia experience, and it's specifically targeted at a particular market. So we think that kind of trend, market-specific, domain-specific publishing on top of unique platforms will increase as well. We also think that the interoperability, while, again, so far I've just been talking about the iPad and hammering on that, we have quite a number of customers where the content they want to serve up to their customers first appears in the morning maybe on their iPad. That worker customer goes to the office, views the content on their laptop. They want to see it generally in the same form factor. They want to interact with that information largely in the same way they did on their iPad, or more challenging, vice versa. So if annotations are made in one form, they appear in another. I think that the other challenge that's coming along, Microsoft has plans to release Metro, and one of the big concerns and challenges there is while Microsoft has been largely a keyboard and mouse experience, how does that marry up with what I just referred to in interacting with an iPad or other tablet devices where it's a gesture-based notion? So those are some of the key things that we wanted to mention. All right, let's go on to the next one here. You should up to the next slide. Great. So another peeling of the onion. We think that the content, the way the customers are looking at this, so the behavioral change that I referred to earlier, real-time information. This is not just we're going to print information, we're going to go on 6-month or year print cycles. Customers have become acquainted with and accustomed to getting information instantaneously. They want it always on, and they want it mass customized information. They want it just for me, which means that that information has to be served up in small packaging. So that the publishing model has been driven by large content, large predictable production cycles, static content, maybe in monolithic form like PDF documents. There's a huge challenge of taking that information and atomizing it down to make it servable to this environment that we just talked about. So content, we talked about that, no longer standalone, wrapped in software, not only ideas about other content, but the mechanism of serving that content up. And we think that delivering that same experience over these platforms is going to be critical to success. So what's the next step? Where does this go? We think that when we talk to media executives, there's some statistics here from Jordan Edmondson surveying 500 media executives. What they're finding is overwhelmingly developing new products is the key to driving revenue over the next 3 to 5 years. Product line extensions, republishing, imprint strategies, very much on the fringes, developing completely new products by taking their content, their digital artifacts, and repackaging them in new ways to new platforms and to new customers. And so that's really what the challenge is. So what I want to do is bring in my two colleagues now. We'll talk directly about the 5 business transformations that we see. The order on your screen there for slide 6, we're going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to ask Steve to step up and start with the notion of developing new products. Renee will cover improved workflow and managing content assets. And then we'll have Steve wrap up with incorporating software technologies that I mentioned a minute ago and how to organize for continuous change. So with that, Steve, why don't you take it away?
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you everyone for joining. Jim mentioned the one statistic that 73% of media executives are planning to invest in new product development in the coming year, and new product development is a tremendous area that we're seeing in our practice, and I'd like to talk about what it is that we are seeing in the marketplace and from our customers by way of an example. And this particular example is from a professional publisher who had a loose leaf product. The loose leaf product, it was a long-standing, staid product that was updated on a monthly cycle, but had become stale. They were looking for a way to get to really improve the user experience, that customer experience with how they engage with their content, with the product. They were looking for faster update cycles in other words, and again, one of the other things Jim mentioned, how do you get content pushed out faster? How do you get away from that monthly update cycle of the loose leaf product to be able to get content out in nearly real time? And how do they go about updating and opening up new revenue streams? Now, in attacking this problem, we worked with this particular client, working through the methodology that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, where we spent a little bit of time focusing in and understanding what the target platform was going to be like, and then working through a process that we call content profiling, where we understand what the content is that they have today, what the content and what content needs to look like in the future in order to drive the kinds of functionality that the customer is looking for in their product. And this was another thing that Jim touched on a little bit, and that's that we're seeing a real coming together from a development perspective and from a product development perspective of content, technology, and user interface, and developing those at the same time. Traditionally, you have people that are developing content, and traditionally you have another group of people that are developing technology, and then the two are coming together on the back end. What we found is that is not delivering fast enough to market, and if we bring together the development activities across content, technology, and UI, then we're able to deliver product to market faster. In this particular example that I was talking about, we developed, built, and launched release 1 of this product in about a 6-month window. And what they had in that 6-month window in delivering a first release was that they had a single view access for multiple content types. The content was spread across the loose leaf product and really was not very well integrated or easily traversable. And by developing content and technology together, we were able to do enrichment of the content, at the same time marrying that with the technology, with the software, and bringing the experience a lot closer together between the two. They also have search capability now, which is significantly greater than flipping through a loose leaf finder, you can imagine, with some wizards on top of that to help direct certain kinds of search. There's browse capability and near real-time updates available as well. We've also gone through the process of adding in this first release, within the first 6-month window, a number of productivity tools, including the ability to print, email, and save capabilities. Now, one of the things that I find interesting, at least from the product perspective, related to the updating function, since we are working now with the combination of content and software, we're able to make customers or readers are able to make annotations in the content. They're able to make annotations in the content. They're able to highlight and such. And then combining the power of the content architecture with the push and the update cycle, we're able to actually flag for a reader when content that they've annotated or highlighted has changed. So we'll continue talking over the next couple of slides and couple of examples as we go through transformation, some of the details underneath each of these methodologies that are identified here. But I wanted to start off by giving an example where in a very short time frame, a publisher was able to move from a print product to a digital product and begin reaping the benefits of that transformation, including the opening up of new revenue streams, being able to update content quicker, and also being able to drive and improve user experience. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague, Renee, who will talk about improving workflows.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Another important business transformation is to re-engineer your print-based workflows to be digital first. And I recently worked with a client who is a large legal publisher that had a print-based editorial workflow, and their production processes to deliver the content to their web platform was bolted onto the end of that. Their editorial workflows were also very siloed by product, and by product-centric workflows, I mean that the entire editorial workflow is centered around one product. This this publisher had teams of editors that would acquire content, enrich it, create new content just for that one product, even though another team of editors just down the hall were doing similar work to the same content. And this was very inefficient. This client also struggled with making their print-based updating processes support the expectations of their online customers. Their updates were just not happening fast enough. And as Jen mentioned, users of digital products expect that the content that they're looking at is relevant and current, and therefore updates must be near real time as well as granular. Of course, print products typically have slower content update cycles, and those updates are delivered in larger batches. Updating online products is challenging when you put print first. So in re-engineering this client's processes, we transitioned them to content-centric workflows where editors are focused on acquiring, enriching, and creating media-neutral, product-agnostic content assets. These content assets can then be assembled into products downstream in the process. So in this model, we put building products at the end of the content supply chain process rather than at the beginning. And editors become focused on enriching and creating content assets that can be reused in many products. And this enables faster new product development. And production processes can then deliver them to different media channels, including print, web, tablets, iPads, etc. And when new delivery channels are needed, these can be more easily added. Also, any updates to these content assets can happen at a much more granular level. An update to a single content asset only has to be processed once, and then those changes can be pushed out to the multiple products. So in summary, content-centric editorial workflows that put digital first can support grab-and-go assembly of content into new products, as well as support faster updating cycles. Okay, so managing content assets, it's another important business transformation is to manage content assets at a granular level. For the legal publisher client that I mentioned in the previous slide, by having a repository full of content assets that are granular, standardized, media neutral, and product agnostic, they can quickly create brand new derivative products by assembling existing content assets. This allows them to monetize their existing content in new ways by just recombining their assets. Another consideration about content assets. Features and functionality in digital products are often driven by certain types of content enrichments. For example, you might have a web-based product where you have advanced search features used by end users that may be driven by metadata. You might have relevancy ranking for search results that also might be driven by metadata. You might have browse trees that allow your users to navigate content that might be driven by a taxonomy, or a window that lists related documents that might be driven by underlying content relationships. These metadata, taxonomies, links, and relationships are examples of content enrichments that are often needed by applications to support the various features in your digital products. So it's important that you not only manage the content assets, but also the content enrichments as well. For this client, we designed a content architecture where content enrichments, such as metadata, taxonomies, links, relationships, are stored and managed outside the core content assets. And we did this for several reasons. One is so that the content assets and the enrichments, like metadata, can be modified and added independent of one another. So we can add lots of new metadata to a large quantity of content assets without affecting the content assets themselves, and vice versa. We can change content assets without affecting any of the metadata. Another reason for storing and managing things like metadata and relationships outside the content is so that these enrichments can be contextually applied to products. So for example, there may be products that share content assets that have common taxonomy topics, whereas some taxonomy topics for products may be product specific. So the content architecture that we developed for this client enables the layering of enrichments so that we can contextually apply them during product assembly. So a product assembly tool can grab the common enrichments as well as the product-specific enrichments that apply. This allows us to support product-specific features and customized views of content for digital products. As a last point, as you develop new products, support new delivery channels and devices that come to market, or even as your existing online products evolve, your content enrichments will need to evolve too. New enrichments such as new metadata fields will need to be added quickly to support these new product launches and new product features. It's important that both your content architecture and your editorial workflows are agile enough to adapt to these never-ending new enrichment requirements. Stephen, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Renee. So we're covering pretty quickly some significant transformations that are required in order to adopt digitally. And one of the other ones, the next one that we want to talk about here is incorporating software technology. We've mentioned a couple of times, some key concepts have come up a couple of times already today. One is that content technology and user interface should be developed concurrently. Another is the concept of agile, which we've mentioned a time or two in here. And I'll hit on both of these over the next couple of slides. One way of incorporating software technology, I'll use another example here with a professional publisher. This professional publisher had a desire to, essentially the idea was to create a new e-reader. Why did they want to create an e-reader? They wanted to create an e-reader because existing e-readers and what we're seeing on the market today are generally tied to static content. They have very rudimentary search capabilities. And the focus has generally been on fiction or trade publishing versus professional publishing. And this professional publisher was really interested in providing a way to deliver their content across multiple channels, across multiple devices, including print. Wanted to be able to sell via Amazon. They wanted to be able to deliver their content to an e-reader and also generate XML, which was compatible with their editorial environment. And so our decision with them was to develop a platform to deliver this. The platform was set up so that we could manage on the back end. And this is an example of incorporating software technology with content. We were able to utilize on the back end integration with their subscription systems and general fulfillment systems, as well as editorial systems, and create a repository for their content, which could then be distributed across these multiple channels. Now, another big decision and another big question in terms of actually delivering content is what technologies would they actually use? There's a question that comes up frequently, or it comes up a lot now, between utilizing web applications, which are applications which essentially run in a browser, versus native applications for, say, the iPad or an iOS application, or an application which runs on Android or one of the flavors of Android. Well, this particular publisher decided to go with more of a web application and utilize the technology of HTML5, and that has given us some tremendous flexibility in terms of how content is delivered. So if you can imagine, we have in the background a software, a technology platform, which manages all of the back office and also contains content, which is then distributed in multiple media. But from a mobile perspective or from a PC perspective is delivered via HTML5. So that's enabled us to make this content available in the web browser. It's also available on Apple devices today, and Android distribution is planned in a coming release. Some of the key reasons and some of the key rationale for choosing HTML5 in this example is to in fact mitigate the risks of change in a rapidly changing mobile development market, and to be able to support rapidly new mobile platforms. This client's now able to reuse some of their development resources, which are focused on the web now, for multi-device capability. And we're seeing a number of publishers taking this approach today. We're seeing the Financial Times, Thomson Reuters, Nature Publishing Group, Hearst Magazines, and Dow Jones, for example, investing heavily in HTML5 and utilizing that as a standard for them going forward. And the last of the business transformations we'd like to talk about is organizing for continuous change. And this is really where, at least in my mind, Agile steps in, and Agile comes to the front. Agile in the software world is fairly well known. If you go into an IT shop today, you can probably understand, you can probably talk with someone about Agile. But when you marry Agile technology development with content development, it's a little bit different animal. And it gets to where we were speaking of combining content and combining technology together and developing them together. What we're trying to do when we put together an Agile project is identify, put together in packages and put together in short sprints changes to both the content and the technology at the same time in order to deliver those together and ensure that the technology is supporting the functionality required in the content and the content is supporting the functionality required in the technology. Another important aspect of organizing for continuous change is to develop a release plan and a release strategy. And what we do and how we are working with our clients today is setting up that release plan so that we have incremental releases and planned releases that get early product out into the marketplace with and enable and develop and derive feedback from customers that are actually using that product. And that's an important cycle to set up. So those are some of the items that need to be considered as you look at organizing for continuous change. And with that, I think I'm going to turn things back over to Jim.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Renee. Stephen, I've got a follow-up question. We talked about Agile development, and in the discussion you talked about the simultaneous development of content, the application, the technology in the UI. But let's say I'm a publisher new to developing the applications. What are my customers going to see? Maybe I've built a website, but now we're talking about something quite a bit beyond that where there are functions and keystrokes and lever bars and all that. How does a publisher, I can imagine in the old days we used to write long documents, 30-page tomes, trying to map out every single feature of the software we're developing. What kind of tools or techniques or methods would be involved in looking at that solution, maybe visualizing it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jim, because we utilize a methodology. It's actually called solution visualization, where we do get into understanding what the deliverable is going to be without writing out those large Excel spreadsheets or large Word documents that are very difficult to consume and difficult to understand. The way solution visualization works is we'll start out and work with really kind of whiteboarding out what the solution may be, whiteboarding what how the system is going to interact, or how a reader might interact with the system, or how an editorial person might interact with the application, and move from there into a series of low fidelity and high fidelity wireframes that kind of build out a picture. And then we talk about from there, what we would do is develop big user stories or big stories around the implementation, and through our agile process, narrow those down into a series of releases, and then narrow those down into specific sprints that could be as short as 2 to 3 weeks in cycle, in order to begin building on and delivering rapidly that solution that has been visualized and documented using visual means versus textual means.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. Renee, in both of your discussions, you talked about granular content, and you talked about taxonomies and DTDs, and I understand what those are, but how can we describe that better in terms of the content? In other words, I could look at a book and it has pages and chapters, or I could look at content that a publisher has that's in a variety of repositories. How do we describe the granularization, or what I've called the atomization of that? Is there a way to get our hands around that?
Right. In looking or thinking about, it's not a one size fits all that this is the right granularity for this particular publisher or company. So there's not a one size fits all that says what the right granular level is to manage your content. In some cases, it may be at a document level, a chapter, a section, and in the case of the legal publishing example, they in order to make updates in their print-based world, they had to push out the equivalent of 300-page documents and make updates to push out to their online platform in order to make small changes. They had to push the whole content for update cycles online because it was still a print-based workflow. Now what they're able to do is push it, and their granularity is at a paragraph level. They can push paragraphs of changed content and push those out immediately. So again, you get that fast update cycle to the users in a smaller level. Paragraph may be too much for other publishers. So there's a lot of gray in between. It may be at a document or a section or a chapter or something lower, but it's what you can manage from an updating cycle and through an enrichment cycle, what metadata applies at what level. Those kinds of things are determined when you really look at your workflows and really look at your content architecture and what the right fit is for managing your kind of content.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's, it sounds like a bit of experimentation would be the right approach, because that's going to be very publisher and content specific. So I get
right.
that.
And it might be that you start bigger. Maybe in a first phase you're starting to manage your documents at a chapter level or something much higher, with the goal of getting down to managing at more granular levels, and you want to plan for that in the way that you architect your workflows and your content architecture, so that maybe you start at a higher level, but you can manage more granularly over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thanks. All right, excellent. So I'm going to take some liberties here. We've got a few minutes left. There's some questions coming in. So I'll read the question, and then I'll take a crack at the first one, and then we'll go through it, and I'll ask Steve and Renee as appropriate to chime in. So the first question I'm going to tackle is, back to solution visualization, the question is, do we consider only what resources or assets we have on hand at the time, or do we anticipate what may be possible or what you might have in the future, even though that future is not immediate? So I think one of the things that for me personally, I'm newer to publishing than I am to software. So my background was software engineering and the software industry overall. And what I see married between these two is much more rapid cycles, starting with what you have. So direct answer to your question, start with what you have and get in practice of developing that content software combination and serving it up to your customers. We've had a number of situations where customers have worked very hard for upwards of a year trying to decide, continuing to embellish their online product, but not releasing it to the marketplace because there was always one more thing to add. And it was mentioned earlier today that a progressive release approach might be the right way to go, and that would be to release whatever you have on a quarterly basis and continue to update it. And that fits in with the comments that I introed with, which have to do with the sort of keeping things fresh, keeping them active, keeping them live, and continuing to add value and content. So my recommendation is, and it's a very big, complex space to get all of that content, the technology, everything we've talked about, working just right. So start with smaller chunks and work off of that. All right. So here's, let me refresh the question list. So here's the question. Stephen, I'm going to ask you to tackle this one. Question is, do you have any tips for managing mindset change from a creative print content to agile content development? In other words, what's the hardest part of that transition?
Yeah, that is that's a very, very interesting and potentially complex question, Jim, because there is a significant mindset change from creating print content to agile content development. In the print world, editors are often worried about form and format and whether looking at the font and looking at spacing and looking at how the printed word appears on the page or images. As we move into more of an agile content development methodology or approach, that mindset shifts from one of developing a book or a magazine or some other printed material to developing content which can then be rendered across a lot of different ways. And we have found that a number of editors and even production folks have a difficulty in making that transition. So in my opinion, I think one of the hardest areas is actually shifting from a product-based orientation to one where you're looking to build content and build a rich, deep content repository. It works. People do make that transition, but I think it happens over time, and it happens with training and with orientation to what the long-term objectives are of the publishing process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So just again, a reminder to the audience: if you now's the time. If you have other questions, they're coming in now. So just give you a heads up on that. Renee, next question to you, and I'm going to paraphrase this a bit. How does developing content that's grab and go, the way we've been describing it, how does that affect the way the authors of the content would be compensated? What's our experience with our customers, our publishing customers, when they look at changing not only the product, the organization around the product, but also their relationship with their authors? What's been our experience? What's been the publisher's experience on that?
Right. Well, that's a great question, especially when you're dealing with content that's acquired. At least part of your content is acquired outside of your organization, in that there may be contracts or rights, digital rights that have to be managed for that content, and how it gets used in different products needs to be managed. So things, so along with those content assets has to be business rights information that describes, what the, is that, what are the rules or things that have to be controlled for that to be used in all the different contexts and all the different products. So it's important to think about in these kind of grab-and-go product assembly models to look at rights information and managing your business rights. That's one of the things that the legal publisher that we work with had to create in order to support this product assembly process. Is they also have to better manage their business rights. It's much easier when they have a product-centric workflow that the editors would manage those business rights. All they had to worry about was the one product. But now when they're working on content assets that could be used in any product, existing products and products yet to be developed, and they're not in control of that, you now have to manage the business rights.
Okay. We didn't cover it very much today, but what kind of systems, technology are publishers using? The publishers, some are our customers and others, to store all of this content. I mean, databases and so forth, but is Oracle or people, I'm getting down into the weeds a little bit, but what sort of tool set are people using? Stephen, can you take a crack at that?
Yeah, I'll take a start. So we see everything from I guess the two main areas that we see is we see some traditional content management systems being used in this area. So applications that are built on products like Oracle or built on an XML database that manage the check-in, check-out, that manage versioning and provide all of those sorts of capabilities. There's a long list of vendors that supply that sort of capability. But where we're seeing actually some of the most significant power is when we're utilizing XML databases and databases that are tuned for XML. So they understand XQuery. They understand that content is not stored in the form of a document, but it's stored as content objects, which can then be assembled in that grab-and-go way that Renee has been talking about. One of the most significant XML databases that we've seen and that we've utilized in a number of the examples that we've given today is MarkLogic. And so we find a significant amount of power in that platform in terms of storing content as well as distributing and using it as a mechanism or as a starting point for content transformation.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Okay. We've got time probably for two more questions. Let's see. All right, so here's the question. What is, as a small publisher, you fear that the money earned from the various new products you produce will not exceed the money spent on the development and the money lost from the cuts taken out by distributors at every turn? Right. So, I mean, this is on slide number 1. This is a major challenge. What we're starting to see, I guess the first answer is nobody's completely cracked it. I think if we go around to our largest customers, they're trying 3 or 4 different revenue models to figure that out. Those that are on the ebook space certainly are in the turbulent waters, certainly between Amazon's pricing strategy, Apple's pricing strategy. Certainly in units, in a lot of the trade space, we see units of ebooks, for example, increasing quite substantially. The margin is okay, but the total dollar amount is different. So the question is, as pointed out in another question here, what's the ROI? How much, what's the cost of content acquisition, then the development of these things? So certainly the ROI models are going to be longer term, I think. What I said a couple of questions ago that was the issue about solution visualization is start with smaller bite-sized pieces. I mean, that also limits your downside risk in terms of the ROI. I think where we've seen large, if you pardon the expression, gargantuan projects, they're well thought out, but they're really massive and they're going to take a lot of time. We and the customers are very hard pressed to figure out what the ROI is, and our almost stock answer is there: trim it down, slice it down, do some, get some points on the board. Sorry for the cliche, but get some points on the board, do some things you have a very high rate of or chance of success on, and then build off of that. All right. So with that, why don't we wrap it up? And I'm going to pass it back to Calvin and for any last comments there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jim. Well, it does look like we're completely out of time. I would like to remind all the people in the audience that if your question wasn't answered, we will be answering questions by email. So, look, thanks for all the great questions. Thanks for attending today's webcast. Thanks to our panel and presenters for today's 5 business transformations demanded by rapid digital adoption. Sponsored by Innodata and by Publishers Weekly. You can find this webcast as well as other archived and forthcoming webcasts at publishersweekly.com/webcasts. Upcoming webcasts include a frontlist presentation from Publishers in Christian Fiction and another from our favorites in crafts and hobbies. Have a great afternoon, everyone.